Thank you for tuning in to another episode on the Scouse Oracle channel. Thank you for being here. If you can hit that subscribe button, it would massively help. Now, I do want to be bringing to you the real world risks mapped to contracts, suppliers and legislation when it comes to the digital ID. Because what's actually happening is the gov.uk one login is explicitly designed to replace over 190 separate login systems and become the single way to sign into government services. And if you've been following me, you'll see where I've been showing the infrastructure behind it, and it's not been getting attention on the mainstream media. And I'm going to be going into the risks involved and how this is going to affect our children. So the gov.uk one login will eventually let users access any government service with the same credentials, where you only have to provide identity once. The Cabinet Office Accounting Officer System statement confirms one login relies on contracts with Ernst & Young and KPMG to provide identity verification services alongside other third-party services. GDS, which are a team that sits inside the Cabinet Office, and you've heard me talking about them before when I've submitted my Freedom of Information requests. They signed a multi-million contract with Deloitte, Experian and PA Consulting to build and support one login and the identity app, around 24 million in total, which uplifts bringing some deals over 20 million. Now, you'll previously would have heard me talk about Deloitte. Now, the GDS, so the team that sits inside the Cabinet Office, their guidance confirms one login runs on its own AWS organisation, and AWS tagging rules explicitly include product gov.uk one login, showing a dedicated cloud estate. So an AWS is an Amazon Web Service. It's like a giant cloud. So it's a computing platform. It's a huge data center. So you've got these huge data centers and we basically rent out storage. So that's where it's all stored. So commercially, the UK is buying a single cloud hosted identity hub built and run by a small cluster of big consultancies and cloud providers, with AWS, the Amazon Web Services, as the main hosting backbone. So how this ties to risk is centralization isn't a conspiracy theory, it's the design goal. So the one login plus the AWS is one logical platform for authentication and identity proofing. And then you've got the DSIT, you've got the blueprint for modern digital government, and the NCSC, which sits inside the GCHQ, which is Government Intelligence Agency, in the annual review, both describing digital first operating model where one login and a digital wallet sit at the core of the government services. So bear that in mind when I'm saying the gov.uk one login is explicitly designed to replace over 190 separate login systems and become the single way. So then what you have here of when you've got hundreds of separated systems poured into one AWS backed hub, protected by a handful of vendors, you're creating the exact thing hackers dream of. One hack across everything. Now, you've got the normalising of biometric surveillance, and the risk as well is the biometrics are permanent. Once captured and templated, you can't change your face. So the contracts and systems here, the gov.uk one login app explicitly uses facial recognition, and it works by matching your face to your photo ID. So identity journeys rely on digital ID checks at home, via the post office, with data saved, so you do not need to prove your identity again. So a recent generic identity verification service tender explicitly seeks suppliers with biometric identity verification, facial recognition, and liveness detection capabilities. And if you've been following me for a while, you've seen where I've shown these contracts. Scotland's digital ID, called the Scot account, uses photo facial match against passport and driving licence under a contract with Experian for identity verification and fraud checks. And just recently, I have had messages from people who've been updating their address within the DVLA, and they've been having a soft check appear on their credit checks. Now, it's not going to affect your credit score, but it's tying in financially. So bear that in mind. You've got Soprasteria has run UK visa and immigration service centres, managing biometric enrolment, photos, fingerprints, signatures as part of UK VI contracts. So as I've shown before, and I've said, you've got the separate 20 million live facial recognition tender for police forces, plus predictive policing combined with the facial recognition and the AI crime maps. So what you've got is a central government, one login app plus an ID check ecosystem, devolved gov, Scot accounts using facial match, then the Home Office migration with the Visa and Biometrics app, policing with the live facial recognition tender and predictive policing projection. So how that ties to risk is you've got the procurement language of the liveliness, fraud prevention, identity proofing, masks what operationally is being built. So a culture where biometrics become the default login method, contracts all reinforce the same logic, prove you are you via reusable biometric templates. So the commercial decision is automate identity checks with biometrics because it's cheaper and faster than humans. So that is how they are putting this across. And the risk to that is once your face and biometrics exist across multiple government and contractor systems, the reuse of it becomes the norm. And if the template leaks or are misused, there's no reset. So a password breach isn't an incident, and a biometric breach is a lifelong condition. And then you've got the function creep. So it starts with convenience and it's quietly evolving into mandatory infrastructure. So the evidence in law and strategy here is we've got the House of Commons library confirming one login is replacing 190 systems and a new mandatory digital ID scheme. That was September 2025. Will build on one login plus the digital wallet. You've got the government press release. The digital ID will be mandatory for right to work checks by the end of this parliament. You've got the Data Use and Access Act 2025 and the Digital Verification Services Trust Framework creating statutory foundations for the digital ID expansion. As I've previously shown you before, when these contracts have become live, you've got the DSIT's blueprint and the NCSC annual report review place one login digital wallet at the centre of the digital first government model. So the progression in reality here is you've got the optional try our new one login. It's easier than the default with Find a Tender, the gov.uk app require one login. So that's what we've been seeing in the tenders. Then you've got the critical services with benefits, visas, education, license moving to one login. Then you got the legal hooks around it, the mandatory right to work checks. The trust work framework enables expansion into finance and private sectors. So commercially what they're saying is we build the systems that scale easily across services, and then the risk is that function creep isn't hypothetical. It's coded into the tenders, the frameworks, and the statutory powers. And if you look at the consent without understanding, which I feel as though a lot of people may be thinking that they can still stop a rollout of a digital ID. But when you're looking at what's being built, as I'm saying, it's already here. The people think they're just using a service, but they're enrolling into an identity system. And the official documentation shows one login automatically saves identity data after verification for future reuse. Identity assurance activates occur in the background, sharing data with authoritative sources. The trust framework creates certified verification providers with them legal gateways. So the spending data shows major investments in fraud engines, case management, legal services. That's invisible. This is something that I hope have been shown, which is not, the complexities around it are not being explained within the mainstream media when we are talking about digital identity. Meaning you're signing up to one account, but you're entering into that ecosystem, which is evolving contractors, verification engines, third-party data sources, and future cross-service expansions. You see, this is all happening behind the scenes. How they're promoting this is to keep it simple, keep the complexity at the back end, but the consent is legally valid, but nobody's being meaningfully informed. And so then if you look at the behaviour profiling, the risk there is when the identity becomes the gateway to your behaviour. Your behaviour becomes the lockout to the systems. So the existing blocks there, if you've got the mandatory digital ID right to work, meaning that the employment access depends on a valid digital identity. You've got Planter FDP enables behaviour analytics and risk scoring in healthcare. You've got the Ministry of Justice exploring Planter for reoffending risk scores. You've got the predictive policing fusing biometrics, AI and crime pattern mapping. And then you've got the NCSC review confirms digital identity underpinning future mandatory checks. So you've got the pattern, the digital ID, who you are, data platforms, what kind of person you are, access, what you're allowed to do. You see the saying, use analytics to optimize decisions, but then the risk is your access to essentials becomes conditional on data-driven judgments that you can't see or you can't challenge. So if we then move on to the impact that it could have on children, the risk becomes that our children become the first generation with fully traceable digital lives. So where it touches them is if the government's aiming for one mass login adoption, the digital wallet storing credentials long term, the trust framework encouraging identity reuse across education, finance and employment, the Scott account supporting early life identity reuse, and the DSIT and NCSC confirm long-term digital identity first strategy, then early generations could move through life with a persistent identity trail. So you've got children growing up now who would have every interaction tied to one persistent identity record. So when they're entering into adulthood with a pre-existing digital profile used by employers, landlords, government, financial services, you've got commercial decisions. So the media telling you they're designing identity ecosystem across the life cycle, so everything's all in one place. But the risk there is a permanent digital shadow, no autonomy, no clean slate. Now, these are the risks If you've been following me, you'll know I've been asking for the data protection impact assessments. If you've been following me, you'll know that I've been showing the infrastructure. I've been showing the contracts. I have been showing the responses. Tomorrow is the deadline where I should receive a response from the Department of Education regarding the unique identify number. And in that, it'll tell us more. This is something that you need to be aware of. It's not something that we can just stop, because the contracts are there. Some of them are locked in till 2029. And the more knowledge that you have, and it is a lot, but the more knowledge that you have, the more power that you have, and the more clarity. So this is happening. These are the risks. I am not saying that they will tie everything together and it'll happen overnight, but they're the risks. And with anything, there are risks involved. That is why we're asking for the data protection impact assessments, and transparency is key when it comes to this. And I'll bring you the response, or if there's no response, I'll let you know. Because at the same time, as this is happening, we do have the proposals in regards to Article 8 when it comes to privacy and family life. So that is also, I will be asking questions. I'll just keep knocking on them doors and asking them questions. And if they don't open the doors, we'll build a door. So as always, thank you for supporting. Thank you for following, for sharing, for commenting. If you can hit that subscribe button, as I say, it will truly help.